Okay, so it is 6:03. I think we can get started. Mahalo everyone to joining this session on finding and using census data. We're going to be doing a brief overview of what the census is, the different types of census data that you can collect, and getting into perhaps some nitty-gritty tools that you can use to manipulate census data. I'm not going to touch too much on that, but hopefully by the end of the presentation, you're going to come away with a better understanding of what the census is, how to use the census website, which is now, well, it has been the main portal, but now even more so because they've aggregated a bunch of other data in there as well. And you'll hopefully come away with a better understanding of all that. My name is Alphie Garcia. I am a librarian at the University of Hawaii West Oahu. Appreciate everyone joining us today. This is our first workshop that we've ever offered dealing with government data. We've had some training as librarians searching through it, but because of the way the update has happened for the census within the past year, it's undergone a major revision. So we're kind of like still relearning things. So we'll catch you up on what we know, but it's such a massive topic. Don't feel as though we'll be getting everything today. So today we'll be covering a couple different things, but basically the common census surveys. So the primary ones being the Decennial Survey, Decennial Census, and then the ACS, the American Census Survey, American Community Survey. And then we'll be going into how the census takes that data by dividing things into geography and the different types of data tools that they use. And then how is the census data used? And then how can you as an individual find aggregate data? And then we'll touch a little bit on finding personal records, which is its own kind of probably workshop that you could do. And then we'll talk about like why we can't find census records immediately. And that limits our ability to search for personal records. Okay, so what is the census, or what is the US Census? Well, the US Census basically is a collection of data sets that are about population, they're about housing units, they're about businesses, and it's all created under the US Department of Commerce, which the US Census Bureau is under. And in recent years, you may have heard a lot about the census because this was the year that the Decennial Census was released in 2020. The Decennial Census, as you'll learn, is one that's conducted every 10 years. So here's the two major surveys that you'll find with the within the census website. The Decennial Census, again, it's conducted every 10 years. And the last time it was done was 2010. And its goal is to count every person in the United States. And what do I mean by person? I mean citizens, permanent residents, documented and undocumented immigrants, people living in households, people living in institutionalized settings. And what do I mean by institutionalized? Well, college dormitories, military bases, prisons, hospitals, even the homeless are supposed to be counted in this. Like the goal is to get everyone. And there's a specific reason for that, which we'll go into. Now, the American Community Survey is something that's done every year, actually. So every year, I think they survey, I'm blanking on this number and I should have wrote it down. I believe 3.5 million people in the United States based on some statistical tabulations. And this isn't a sampling of, this isn't a complete survey of everyone in the United States. It's like a sampling data, right? You're sampling small subsets of the United States in order to get a statistically valuable data set that you can still draw on and get useful information from. And that one is, again, it's released every year. Typically at the beginning of the fall, they will release what's called the first year data estimates. And then at the end of fall, they'll release a 5-year estimate. So one should have been released because it's the beginning of fall. By the end of fall, they'll release a 5-year data estimate for the American Community Survey. And again, here's a decent slide that shows a good breakdown, right? So the decennial counts every person. The ACS 1 year, it's a small sample size. And then the 5-year survey is a slightly larger sample size. And then you can have varying levels of, I don't want to say authenticity, but accuracy. It's accurate, but there is a variation in accuracy, right? Decennial will be more accurate, but then it's only conducted every 10 years, whereas the ACS is done every 1 year, but it's controlling a smaller population size. And so like margin of error is really important when you're looking at this data, because you want to be reliable, right? If you're a researcher and you're trying to find demographic information, you really have to know what you're looking for and be aware that the tools that you're using, you should be aware of the limitations of the tools you're using, right? So margin of error for decennial is very reliable, a small margin of error, but the greater the time period happens. So if you see the data from the decennial 2010 and you're doing research in 2011, that data is relatively going to be fresh and new. But by 2019, it's a little bit older. There's going to be a new survey done. So like you got to pick and choose sometimes. Okay, so I'll leave that slide up for there. So the Decennial Survey, it is based in US law, right? Article 1, Section 2 of the US Constitution is where you'll find language about why the United States conducts a decennial survey. Again, I think, so the language of the actual article or the section is, let's see, I'll just summarize it. Direct taxes, representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among several states, which may include within this union, according to their respective numbers, shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a 3-year term and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all persons. So already we're getting into, really wonky, problematic language of the actual Constitution. But the sentence, the actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years of the first meeting of Congress of the United States and within every subsequent term of 10 years in a matter that shall be directed by law. So it's in the Constitution to do this survey. The ACS, the American Community Survey, was formally launched in 2005, and it was kind of done to make things cheaper for the decennial survey. So it used to be in the decennial surveys and past decennial surveys, they would give you this long survey, and there'd be many questions. And since the goal of the decennial is to like make sure that you're actually filling out the survey, they decided to kind of break it up. So that's one reason. Another reason, it's much cheaper, right? They're using sample sizes as opposed to surveying everyone, which is a massive undertaking to conduct, right? That's why it has to be done every 10 years, and it's like a massive government effort. The ACS is much less labor intensive. And every question within the ACS does satisfy some aspect of federal law, right? They distribute federal aid with that data to like state and local governments and even individuals based on that data. And again, it's a sample survey, so they aren't asking every single person. And so as a result, there's a high margin of error as compared to other surveys. So just a little quick discussion about demographic data and descriptive data and kind of the differences between the two. And it's important for you to conceptualize and understand this demographic data is basically, as listed here, statistical data about the features of the surveyed population. And it's used by the government to understand, what the population is, what it's composed of, and to create public policy. and businesses can tap into this data to identify like certain locations where they want to build, and what competition and things like that. Whereas descriptive data is a little bit more an analysis of the data, and like that gives you a summary, and from there it's an extrapolation of finding patterns and certain aspects within that data itself, and it helps people, like lay people, including myself, to kind of understand the data itself. So a major subsection of these statistical methods are, or these surveying methods are, like how it's structured. So number one is based around geography, right? Our United States, we have many states, and then within those states they have different subsections, and so it's kind of important to understand how that breaks down. So within that breakdown, you have legal and statistical, and like what is the difference between those two? There's kind of descriptions of statistical data sets, right? So there's data sets that have a specific purpose. So the data is gathered to answer specific questions, and that falls under the statistical category. Whereas administrative data sets, it's kind of like a byproduct of a process. So as an example, the IRS grabs information and they collect taxes with that information. But as a result, they have all this location information. So they could find, theoretically, you could create a data set finding when different people moved, right? Because you would put that on your taxes, and then you could theoretically extrapolate like migration data, like people moving from state to state or within states. So that's an administrative data set. And then there's also derived data sets. So that's like a third aspect that's not really listed here. But that can be data that's created from other data. So there's something called the census population estimates, which actually pull from multiple sources. And I'll have these links that I can share with you. But basically it's pulling from the Decennial, the ACS, from IRS data, and even the Medicare enrollment program. And then you kind of synthesize that data, and then they put it out into the world. So there's many different data types. And when we're going through and actually searching through the website, we might highlight a few, but it's a lot. Okay, so here we have kind of how the geography is broken down within the census itself. So you have your nation, and then within the nation, you can kind of break that down into various smaller aspects, regions, divisions, states, and then just so on and so forth from there. Some censuses will not have all the smaller types of data, right? So the ACS will not have data down to the block level or the block group level, which are the kind of the smallest segments. But there's some surveys within, like I believe the 5-year survey will have information down to the census tract level, whereas the decennial census can get down to the nitty-gritty in certain aspects. So when we're searching and we're looking for things and you're wondering, well, hey, I'm looking in this report or this survey, how come I can't get down to a certain level? And that's probably the reason, because it doesn't exist for that. Let's see. So yeah, in addition to the 50 states, they also count Puerto Rico and the other territories, American Samoa, for example. And within counties, we've kind of listed out the different counties in Hawaii if you're interested. So Hawaii does have 5 counties, and Hawaii County, Honolulu, Kalawao County, Kauai County, and Maui County, and those are all broken down. And when we're searching within the data.census.gov, you'll see how we can kind of break things down. And then within the county, you can have county subdivisions, right? We don't have to get too much into that, but so down to the place level. So you can see as it's growing, so we went from 6 counties or 5 counties, and now we're at places, we're at 151. And then the smaller geographic units basically is where the census can kind of really get down to the nitty-gritty and allow them to collect all the data within that block. Remember, part of this mechanism is to allow the census to follow up, right? So when they're conducting the survey, they can put a check mark on this census block has been completed. And then if it's not, then they know to allocate resources to send out more surveyors to that area so that they can answer the question. Hopefully that makes sense. So again, going back to statistical categories, again, these are tools managed by the Census Bureau to kind of better deploy their own resources to conduct this like incredibly labor-intensive task of surveying the entire population, at least for the decennial. Now we've highlighted some tools here. We haven't gotten into the actual census website, but there are many other vendors that kind of tap into the census data. Now the census data itself is free, it's open source, it's available to the American public, and it's aggregated data, right? It's compiled data that you can then download and extrapolate and play with as you need. But if you're not like a data wonk, that can be challenging or that can be frustrating because maybe you don't know Excel very well, or for example. You can tap into these tools like Social Explorer, Census Geographies, Census Geocoder that can help you, that can leverage the data from the census, and they display it maybe in easier to search formats or in formats that you prefer. And when we get into it, you'll kind of get a picture of what the data looks like. But these things exist. Some of them are free, some of them are not. So that's one thing important to highlight. And then when we're looking for ANSI codes, so basically ANSI is the American National Standards Institute. It comes up with a standardized language for geographic identifiers. So librarians love it because, you know, if I want to find a specific place and I want to know exactly what that place's name is, I'll look it up in the ANSI code, find the code, and then I can search for that. And that's an important tool when we're looking for places that have similar names as another place. You can really limit things to just ANSI codes. If you wanted to, you can go to this website, learn more, although I don't think you can actually see that link. But let me see if I click on this, and this is a list of all the ANSI codes for Hawaii. This is just a text file. And you can see here that's a long, or no, it's not too long because we're a smaller location, but these codes can be helpful for searching within Hawaii if you're ever needing to narrow things down. Okay, so how is census data used? This is important. Again, like we touched on a little bit before, they do allocate federal funds, right? According to this, $675 billion a year in federal funds is distributed among the different states and communities. You can build job prospects. You can use it for local use. And there are a lot of different ways that you can explore this. And again, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but when the decennial survey is conducted, this is how we get representatives in the House of Congress or in the House of Representatives, right? So the more people you have, the more members you can have in Congress or in the House of Representatives. So it's critically important to have an accurate number so that you're not being short shrifted. So you know, that's one of the reasons why it's super important. And then also they use that data to kind of establish district boundaries, which have huge electoral implications. There have been many controversies surrounding the survey. And the survey itself has not been consistent throughout the years, right? So they started it at the beginning of the United States in the late 1800s, and then continue on to this day, and that the questions within the survey itself have changed, right? For example, I think in the early 20th century or maybe late 19th century, they would ask questions about religion, right? And you can only imagine that if someone asked you about religion, you would not want to fill out that form these days, right? But it was not so big of a deal. back then, or a few hundred years ago. But now we take that kind of thing, yeah, as a, you know, dealing with separation of church and state. That's very fundamental. So I do have two links here as to why the census is conducted at all, when perhaps private companies can do it better. And this link, as you'll see later on, goes to a Washington Post article that was done in 2017, where Google came up with an algorithm. I don't know if it was Google or one of the researchers came up with an algorithm to utilize Google Street View data to tap into cars driving around and looking at how many cars are parked in a garage. And then from there, they can extrapolate, you know, how many people live in a certain geographical area. And that was, for their tiny subset, was proven, or they thought proved, that perhaps it was more accurate than the census. Now, that's extremely problematic, right? You shouldn't leave this, at least this is my view, you shouldn't leave that kind of information up to private companies. Like Facebook and Google already have enough issues with privacy and things like that. And so it's better to have some kind of representation, which you can if it's a government agency. And that's kind of my feeling. And they've been doing it for a long time. They're continually tweaking it. So yeah. And then if you remember very, very recently, there was a question as to whether the citizenship should be included in the census. And this was last year, I believe, and it was only recently struck down by the Supreme Court. And just a brief history lesson on that. In 1950 was the last time anyone was asked about citizenship on a questionnaire. And the implication for this time around, or this period, was that, at least the argument was made, why would I answer a question or why would I fill out the census if I'm not a citizen, right? So there's kind of it puts a barrier between accurate representation and counting enumeration of all people living in the United States, regardless of citizenship. So Supreme Court did decide not to leave off that question. Professor Moda-Black also mentions that mixed households would have been deterred from answering, right? So even people who were citizens probably would have not wanted to completely or accurately fill out the census. And so that was hugely problematic. And their argument, when I say they, the Trump administration was saying they wanted to obtain the data to help the Justice Department better enforce federal voting rights laws, which is complete bunk. And it turned out that a Republican redistricting strategist named Thomas Hoffler was discovered to have been came up with this strategy that adding this question would definitely lead to people not filling out the questionnaire. And then this would be hugely beneficial to a certain political party, right? And this only came out because he passed away and his daughter found his hard drives and shared them with the world. And so it ended up that the Supreme Court this time decided to vote to leave that off the census. So we got by the skin of our teeth on that one, kind of. So just a little quick history lesson of how politics can still get involved and how it can be like hugely problematic. Okay, so finding aggregate data. So now, all right, so let's head over to data.census.gov. This is what it looks like. Isn't it great? No, don't worry. I'm just joking. This is the first iteration of the Census Bureau from 1996. It looks much better now. This is kind of what it looks like now. So as of 2020, which is only a few months, all census data is going to be accessible through a portal called data.census.gov, and you can type it in. You can look through it now, but we'll be kind of doing a deep dive into this, or at least a peripheral dive. And in this portal, you can find the decennial census information, ACA, other surveys like the Population Estimate Program, And maybe you're wondering like, okay, well, so the survey was just conducted and there are news reports saying that 99.5% of everything has been tabulated. Don't ask me how they know that, but that's what the Census Bureau is saying. And so you're wondering, when is that data going to be available, the most current data? And the answer to that is typically takes about 3 years. So summary data will be available for the last survey in May 2021. And well, between May 2021 and September 2022. And then all the data is supposed to be released in April of 2023. And because of the language of the Constitution and the articles surrounding the survey, there should be some kind of report that goes directly to President Trump this year. So I don't know that he reads those things, but supposedly he's supposed to get some kind of data about the census overall. Okay, so we have to remember, and if you've ever been on any other library workshop, we can't treat this tool like we do with Google, right? Google, we can type in anything, we're gonna get billion results back. It uses very unique terminology, something specific to the census. And so the more you know about the census, and hopefully this workshop will help with that, the more and the easier you can search for things, because you'll know what's in it and you'll know what's not in it. You can, however, take advantage. They've got a great autocomplete that we can kind of take a look through. So in this example, I'm looking for school, and I just wanted to see what comes up. So I'm just going to data.census.gov, and I'm just going to type in school, and you can see the autocomplete in action. So I've got types of school, school enrollment, and then because it's keyword based, I have actual physical locations like Schoolcraft County, Michigan, Schoolcraft Township in Kalamazoo County, Michigan. So basically, any keyword can also work. So I'm going to click on type of school. So when I click on a result, it's going to show me a list of results. So I've got tables. If I scroll down a little bit further, I've got maps. And if I scroll down further, I have pages. Now these two are, well, maybe tables isn't self-explanatory, but all the data represented from these surveys, whether it's ACS, the Decennial, they're all tabulated into these tables, and they all have unique classifications. Every table has a kind of a unique code, and in general, you can know, if you know the table code, that should follow throughout the years. So you can see your table B14002, sex by school enrollment, that applies to years 2019 all the way to 2010. And we can see where that survey is coming from. So the ACS, the American Community Survey. And so we can click on that and look through it. The maps is kind of another way of viewing the data. So it'll actually pull out a graphical interface. I haven't gone too much over that one, but pages, what does that mean? So pages basically deal with the census.gov and not data.census.gov. So any information on the census.gov that apply to that keyword that you're using will show up there. So not necessarily statistical information, but maybe information about, some article that census.gov wrote about it. So that's an important distinction to make. So in this case, I'm going to look at the school enrollment. School enrollment. So I'm going to go up, and we've got school enrollment from the American Community Survey. And I can see here, in general, when you don't specify what location you're going to look for, it's always going to pull up the largest geographic region. So in this case, it's the United States. And if I scroll to the right, it will show you all the information from that that's contained. And then if I scroll down on the left-hand side in the columns, I can see how that is breaking down by the population. So we can see school enrollment, population of a certain age, all the way from early childhood, preschool to 24 years, or even, I guess, 35 and over. So you can see that's useful for like national data, but maybe you want to dig a little bit deeper, right? So here it's showing again what we're looking through, right? So I chose, you can find that on the left-hand panel or on the right hand when you actually click on it, and then starts applying all the data. And then it shows you specifically the type of table ID, which can be useful because you can also search for table IDs. So once you become experts, you can know that S1401 is the code for school enrollment. Okay, and then if we want to filter our results, because look at that, there's 334 results. That's a lot of things to go through. Maybe the relevancy algorithm for the census isn't that great, sometimes you might find. So filtering will allow you to kind of take that data and narrow it down. So I can go take that, and then I can choose, maybe I want to focus on specific geographies. So let's say Hawaii. And again, I'm looking at the state level. I'm not looking at the county level. I could though. And I go down to Hawaii, and this might be the problem where my window is a little too small to apply the changes. Let me see. Oh, I guess, sorry, as I mutter to myself. Okay, so is it narrowing down? Okay, yes. So here I have Hawaii, and this is the school enrollment for Hawaii within the as a 1-year estimate in the ACS. And note here the margin of error, which will be much higher in this survey than it would be in the decennial. But again, this is more recent data, so that's always a game you have to play and juggle. Okay. Okay. So so I talked about that. So there are 2 ways that you could filter. So what section for the year? Does the section for the year pop up? Yes. So again, we're looking at specific products, they call it. And so if I wanted to change years, well, there's a couple ways we can do it. If I went and customized this table and I chose year, let's see, where is year? I won't have a lot of options. You can see that it's grayed out here, and that's because I'm already deciding to use this specific survey type. So if I wanted to change year for this survey, I would need to actually go down and choose a specific one. So ACS 10-year for one-year estimates, and that would kind of fill in the information like that. So hopefully that answers that question. But yeah, one thing that I initially got stuck was I'd be looking through a table, and then I would click on year and be like, why is everything grayed out? How come I cannot choose something else? And that's because in this particular survey, that it's only looking at 1 year, so, or 5 years, or whatever the case is. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay. So again, just to walk through what I did. Yeah, that's a good point. So Sochil mentioned that the survey filters are sticky, meaning that if I'm looking through my geo data and I don't clear something, I don't clear one of the filters, it will kind of stick with you, and that can be problematic. They're doing that for convenience, right? So if you don't have to continually apply the same filters over and over, but it can also be confusing if you're not aware that that's what it's doing. Okay, so another way the data is presented in Census is through what are called profiles. So I can go into data.census.gov and just type in a state or a specific location, and it will kind of give me a brief, or actually a very good overview. Okay, and that's typical of how people find that data. Most people will look by location, right? You want to know what's going on in Hawaii or what's going on in California. And there's a few caveats for that. So when I search for California, let me clear my search, and I'm just gonna, yes, clear. I'm gonna search, start a fresh search. I'm gonna type in California and autocomplete. So the profile will kind of have its special font, and I can choose that. And then you can also see various subdivisions, but I'm going to choose California as a broad subdivision. And then this is the profile page of California. So it zooms in on a map. I can see what the population size is. And every time that you're looking at a subset of information, they are telling you where they're getting this information from. So this is from the 2019 American Community Survey first year estimates, right? So I can see what the estimated population size and the median age and the median, in California, how does that compare with the median age in the United States? So kind of interesting. And again, they're getting this data from all over. It's not just the ACS, it's from Decennial too. So we've got foreign-born population, languages spoken at home, the race and ethnicity, Hispanic and Latino. Some of you may be wondering, like, why is that broken up? That has historical reasons why Hispanics or Latinos aren't included with race data, and it's a little confusing to me as well. But the decision was made, and it's kind of historical, and that's the way it's being followed. But I think part of the reason is you can have Hispanic or Latinos. Oh, okay. So started in Social mentions that it was started in the 1970s, or in the 1970 census, decennial census, and then it's kind of remained. And I think every census thereafter, it may have changed. In this last one, you can actually specify what race you are. And so it's like you can add additional information. So you could be Cuban, but you can also mark you can mark your race as Black, but then also mark it as Hispanic. So it adds value or nuance to the survey data. Hopefully that makes sense. So families and living arrangements, health. So I could go down this whole list, and just to specify like where they're getting this information from. And then if you wanted to actually look at the data, you would just click on the table and it would pull that up for you. And then you could actually see, very importantly, the margin of error, right? Because I mentioned the ACS does have a larger margin of error than the decennial, for example. Oh yeah, so Hawaii, as an odd little quirk of this database, doesn't seem to show up as a subdivision or like a profile. So you actually have to just randomly search Hawaii, and then from here you need to click on Hawaii profile. So I don't know why it doesn't show up. They just don't think about us. Maybe I can submit a request, but it seems odd that that's not a autocomplete option, just the way it is. So don't get confused. There's still a way around it. Okay, so that's one way around it. So again, Hawaii, you can find all sorts of similar information, just like how we looked through California. For the best results, like what I found helpful when I'm doing research or for other patrons is kind of use the advanced search tool. And again, that is located, actually I didn't mention that. It's located if we search census and we go here, so it's right there. And from here, I can actually start breaking things down, and just being very aware of topics and geography and where we're looking for can be extremely helpful. Most people, again, start off with geography just to see what's available. So they can go by state, down to the county, or track or block group. And remember, not all surveys will have this data available. Again, the ACS won't have data available for tract, block group, or block. And so that's something you have to stick with for the decennial. So when should you be using the decennial? When you are looking for detailed counts down to the smallest level of geography, right? Or down to the block level, that's when you should be using the decennial. If you only ever need demographic basics like age or sex or housing units or housing occupancy or housing tenure, that's a reason to use it. You can get really precise information from the decennial. So that's one thing that you can focus on. Studying small population groups that wouldn't be available otherwise from other surveys, that would be a reason to use it. Yeah, maybe again, like I mentioned before, at the beginning of the decade, you're going to get the best data as opposed to at the end of the decade. So something to consider. When should you not search the decennial survey? census or use it as a data set? Well, if you need broader socioeconomic characteristics, those are available typically in the American Community Survey. And then again, that's more current data available. And then when you're looking for demographic variables that are annual, so these you can find through the annual, or there's actually a tool called the Population Estimate Program, which is, you can search Population Estimate Program and then go to the census website and find things there. And they actually show an estimate year by year of various populations, which can be extremely helpful. So when should you use the ACS? And that's, again, if you need the broader socioeconomic characteristics, if you need the most recent data, and if you need to get down to the level of census tracts, they even have zip code tabulation areas, so that can be helpful, but they won't get down to the census block area. When should you not? Again, a lot of this is just the inverse of the decennial, but if you do need socioeconomic characteristics at the state level or the county level, the decennial would be better. Data from the smallest census blocks, if you need data from that really small subset, don't use ACS. National data that's produced through on a monthly basis, you can actually use a different survey called the Current Population Survey. All of these will be in the notes, so don't feel like you need to write these down. Population estimates, that I touched briefly on that, but basically there is a tool that you can use that will study annual population change, and that can be helpful. So unlike the Decennial Survey or the census and the ACS, this is what's called, if you remember earlier, this is an administrative data set, and the administrative data set is created as a byproduct from a process. Okay. Okay, so what are some specific use cases that might be helpful? So you're interested in educational attainment data for all the counties in Hawaii. Well, we can just type in annual or educational attainment, right? That's an easy one to remember. And I'm hoping the autocomplete will, okay, I guess not. There we go. So educational attainment, and it's looking, I can see the different options, American Community Survey, those look okay, I guess, yeah, let's try that. And then from here, I'm going to break it down. So I'm just gonna go hit Customize Table, and I'm going to hit Geo, and I'm gonna go by state, or maybe let's say county. I'm gonna say Hawaii, and that's I'm gonna say all counties of Hawaii, and then I'm gonna hit Close. So if I went too far down, it would throw up an error saying, sorry, Alphie, you can't actually get down to that level. Actually, no, that would be too helpful. It actually just bombs out on you and doesn't tell you what's wrong. But usually that's the reason. And so here we have a list, and if we scroll to the right, we can see, we went through Hawaii County, now we're going through Honolulu County, and you can kind of look through and look at the margin of error and the various statistics. There is an option to download, and we'll play with that a little bit, although we were running a little bit out of time. But yeah, so that's one example of finding quick data at the county level for educational attainment in the United States. Very good for sociological purposes, I'm hoping. What about this question? We're going to find information on business sectors in Honolulu County, like tourism, right? So remember, part of the census data can be tapped in by the business community or by yourself. That if you're curious about starting a business and you want to see, how saturated is the market with this type of business, and so the census might be able to answer that question. So one tool that you can leverage is the NAICS code, which stands for North American, I'm blanking on the title, but let's just type it out. So I'm going to Google NAICS, and I'm going to say tourism. just to see what that code is. And there's a bunch of different websites. You could look at the official websites, but I'm just going to choose 561510 for travel agencies just to kind of get a picture. So I can say, okay, 561510, and I'm going to look back on the census page, 561510, and I can see where it's coming from. So the annual economic surveys. And let's see if it doesn't bomb out at me. So I'm going to choose as the default level. I didn't choose a location, so I'm going to get a little bit clearer view. I want to see, is there anything available for Hawaii at the county level in Honolulu County? And I'm going to hit close. And yes, indeed, there is some information about this topic. One thing I should highlight is with business data, because there are privacy laws in place that really prevent you from getting down to the too nitty-gritty. What they'll sometimes do is actually insert what's called noise into these survey results so that you can't identify specific information. I don't think that should be a problem too much for you folks, but that does exist. And sometimes you'll see as a column, it'll say like noise level. And that's just additional information that they're adding to kind of obfuscate specific information. And that's for privacy. Okay, so yeah, that's how I found out that travel agency code. And then you can search. And then we looked through that one. And in this case, I think I looked at just the state level to see all the different states that had that code, or Hawaii code. So this one I just wanted to show as an example. You can download this file, which if you just Google, not Google, but punch in this URL. Because I wanted to show you how some people would search. So we've looked through some of these results, and you may or may not find it useful for your purposes. But what often happens is you'll download a data set, and then from there you have to manipulate it with something else. So let's see if this works. I think it's just going to go to a Google Drive account, which is but you can also download this as an Excel. So this is an example of decennial table. It's called the PCT 12 report, and it's basically like what's the gender breakdown in the decennial census for male and female, or the sex. I shouldn't say gender. The sex difference between like how many men, how many women, and then you download it, and it looks like this. So everything is actually horizontal, so there's just 3 rows. So the first step that you'll have to do is transpose that data, and it's just a fancy term for in Excel or any other spreadsheet program to copy everything in this. And I won't bore you with actually doing it here, and plus we're just looking at a view-only file. But I've already done this, so I've transposed it, so I've copied and pasted it, and then you plunk it down into a useful sheet. So I just opened up a new sheet. And now I have total male, total female. And actually, if you're looking at the report, total female would be below total male. So I actually had to cut and paste and put it next to, and then I started calculating like, okay, I see that the total is 5,493, but how does that break down? And so you do a quick calculation, and you combine for all males under 1 year old and all females under 1 year old, and then you tabulate it, right? And you go through and you just use the formulas to start tabulating it. And then one interesting thing to do is to think about how does that work with other representations of the data? So for example, generational data. That's not a statistical category in the decennial or ACS, right? Whether we're talking about boomers or Gen X or millennials, these are kind of unofficial terms. I mean, we use them in common vernacular, but they're not in the census, right? So from there, we actually have to identify, okay, well, how what's the age range for boomers, or the greatest generation? And so for that, I looked at a webpage called the Pew Research Center. They did kind of an interesting breakdown of how old they are, what the different generations are. So you can see here, greatest generation started before 1927. And then whereas the boomers were born from 1946 to 1964, millennials are 1997 to 2010, and anything after that, I guess, well, I guess they haven't tabulated the newest generation yet. But what I did, let me back up. So this data I was looking for in Kapolei. So I didn't specify that. So I did a Google search, and I wanted to get down to the census tract level for Honolulu, right? So I searched for that, and I wanted to find out what that code is. So then I can go to, you can see here, geography census from the censushawaii.gov. You can actually look down at the census places. And then on the right-hand side, you can see an interactive map. And within that interactive map, you can see, okay, there's multiple census tracts for Kapolei. In fact, there's more than one. There's one called Kapolei, but there's also like the Kapolei golf course, which is where West Oahu is located. And then, you know, what do you consider Kapolei? Does it include Barbers Point or Kalealoha Airport and things like that? The data itself becomes blurry, and so it depends on what you want to include. So for this example, I just included Kapolei, I believe. So that's why the numbers aren't very big. So then I found that the tract number is 115. So as I'm searching within the database, the census, you can limit things down to the census tract at Honolulu County, which we've identified as Kapolei. And then you have this table that you can download. And you can see there's 5,493 living in this census tract. And then from there, if you want to do anything meaningful with the data, you can then manipulate it and play with it. So here we have kind of like a listing of what the population breakdown. So 1% of the people living in this census tract in Kapolei are part of the greatest generation. And then the largest one is Gen X. So we can say that, you know, with some confidence that Kapolei in 2010 has a relatively young population that's predominantly Gen X. So this is just an example of something that you can do. While it's not represented in the census as a complete tool, you have the ability to manipulate it if you can find the way. And then if you ever need help with that, you can certainly come to the librarians. We enjoy digging and discovering how to do things like that. At least I do. So consider that if you're trying to think of creative uses for the data, or if you're looking to solve a question. I think I'm running a little over. So so this is just me going through the Excel and retabulating things, and again, just identifying the population total percentages, which I don't know, I thought it was kind of interesting to learn a little bit more about where I live and where I work. So other places you can find data. So we mentioned earlier there were vendors that you can pay to who have like gone through the data and synthesized it, but there are also free sources that tap into the same data set, the census data set. And one of them, really importantly, like if you want to compare data across the years or across censuses, you can use the Missouri Census Data Center. Now, the name sounds like it might be specific to Missouri, but it actually does take data from everyone. They're not just focused. They're just, I think because they're part of the university, so Missouri University. So that's an incredibly useful tool that you can tap into, probably beyond the scope of this workshop though. So another one is censusreporter.org, National Historical Geographical Information System. And if you are ever into like GIS, which is, you know, Geographic Information Systems, which definitely use a lot of census data, this is a great tool for that. And then you just saw how I looked in census.gov or hawaii.gov to find like the track number. You can just Google, maybe even using the search limiter site:/hawaii.gov, and then, or census.hawaii.gov, and then you can put in, census tract for Aiea or wherever you're living, and you might find something, or you might find something quickly. So the Hawaii Census website is actually really useful for finding data here and locally. So finding personal records is problematic. For one thing, like we mentioned earlier, the Census Bureau has a, it's necessary for them to keep the privacy. So typically the data isn't released, or not typically, but there is a 72-year rule. They won't release data until it's 72 years old. The idea being that whoever was in that data has passed on, and there's theoretically no incriminating information, or just to respect the privacy of the individuals and to motivate kind of like the survey populace to actually fill out the survey. So that's kind of the reason for the 72-year rule. Some records can be requested. So if you've made a mistake on the survey, you can put in a petition to have it modified. That's a possibility. And again, a lot of it is behind like a paywall, and there basically has to be specific reasons as to why you want to see that data. And usually it's more open if you're looking for your own personal data, and you have to submit a form and go through the government bureaucracy in order to do that. If you did want to find historical data, just to give a plug out to the Hawaii State Public Library, who use or have access to a tool called Ancestry. I'm sure you've heard of it, ancestry.com, where you can actually search historical genealogical records. And a lot of records are based on that census. So if you have your library card and you've established a 4-digit PIN, you can actually get access to it, because unlike before, where you actually had to physically go down to the building and use it, during COVID times, you can actually access it from home. So if you're doing genealogical research, I highly suggest searching through that. So here's a slide where we're looking for Humphrey Bogart and seeing what information we can find. And we can see a little bit of information. We found a record for him, and then the actual form itself, and like what his signature. And so there's a good chance that you're, well, depending on your nationality, but if you've been in the United States for a long time, you might find historical research records from your ancestors. So that can be pretty cool. Other data sites that kind of tap into that, similar to Ancestry. Okay, yeah, first year of so Sochil mentioned the first year of census data was collected for the territory of Hawaii in 1900s. So there's a chance that you can find some relevant information from your ancestors, especially here in Hawaii. But again, many of these sites will be available at HSPLS. I wish we had the funds for these ourselves, but money being tight as it is. But and another option is Family Search. So if you're not aware, there is a small library in Makakilo at the Mormon Tabernacle, I think it's called, and they actually, if you make an appointment with them, you can actually tap into their products for free, because it's Mormons who, I think the Mormon Church owns Ancestry.com. I could be wrong about that, but they are very heavily invested in keeping records and doing this kind of research. They love genealogy, so use them as a free resource. It's definitely possible. My email is listed, alphie@hawaii.edu. You know our website at UH West Oahu Library. You can chat us, you can call us, you can make an appointment, you can do lots of different things to make us. But mahalo to everyone for your time and spending an hour of your evening with me learning about data nerd stuff. So I greatly appreciate it.